Bourbon Barrel Talk. I'm your host, Scott Minton. Today we are sitting down with Mr. Adam Edwards, the digital brand ambassador with Rabbit Hole Distillery. How you doing today, Adam?
Hey, what's going on, y'all?
Good. We're doing great. Also, we have Toby on the panel today.
Hey.
And Mr. OFO fanboy, Josh.
What's up?
So, Adam, tell us a little bit more about how you got here. You know, we're here at Rabbit Hole, and if you want to give us a little bit of background on Rabbit Hole and, you know, the company in general.
Yeah, of course. So, I am from Louisville. So, me personally, I'm a big bourbon guy, of course, and we were just talking about this. I live over there in southern Indiana, just like pretty much you all do, too, and I kind of got drug over there by a girl. I met a girl from southern Indiana, and she drugged me over there.
The sunny side.
Right, the sunny side. We get a better view of Louisville, is what I like to tell people.
You know, Tom Petty wrote a song about that.
This is very true. It's very true. That's why I moved over there, actually. But I always think that's kind of cool because it sort of parallels Rabbit Hole, too, and the way that Rabbit Hole started. Because Kaveh, our founder, he was living in Chicago, and he met a girl from Louisville. And I mean, it hesitates.
Isn't it funny how that happens all the time?
I'll tell you what, it's amazing that, you know, a story can kind of start that way and end up, I mean, both on my side. You know, I met an amazing woman from Louisville and sort of, or from southern Indiana, and she kind of showed me that there's some cool stuff in southern Indiana, and Heather showed Kaveh that there's some cool stuff in Kentucky and Louisville too. So I always thought that was kind of cool. I have that parallel with how Rabbit Hole started. But I've been in the industry for about 15 years. I was a big wine guy for a real long time, but being from Louisville, of course, I'm going to be a bourbon drinker.
You know, you hear a lot of people have that similarity that they started in the wine industry and then moved over to the bourbon industry. How do you think that has really transitioned you into enjoying what you're drinking?
Yeah, well, it made me such a snob, you know. When you're
all right, I wasn't going to say it.
No, I mean, serious. Like when you think about it, you know, wine is one of those things that always has this very kind of cultured sort of feel to it, right? And I think that's changed. I mean, it's a little more inclusive than it was, 20 years ago. Bourbon has always been like an every person's drink, right? It's not a I'm going to use a very country term, highfalutin sort of drink, right? But it's kind of gotten there. It's kind of done the opposite of what wine did, right? And so I think where that intersection sort of happened is where I realized that I could sort of bring my wine skills over to the bourbon world. And, you know, Rabbit Hole, we look at bourbon the same way you do wine. Like, you know, I always use this for an example. Let's say you go out to a restaurant and you order a steak. Well, you can get a red wine. It goes with that steak. It's probably going to work, right? Let's say you go out to a really nice restaurant and you order a filet. And after you get the filet, you got a person come up to you and they say, "Hey, I'm the sommelier. You ordered the pepper-crusted filet. I think you need a Bordeaux or Southern California, you know, Cabernet Franc maybe." It gets a little bit more specific that way, and it's going to go even better with that steak. We think the same way. Why can't you think that way of whiskey? So, you know, I always say this. First of all, we're the sponsors, the official sponsors of the James Beard Foundation for a reason. We think about our bourbons and whiskeys from a culinary aspect. You know, we were just doing a little taste through here, right? Cave Hill and High Gold, those are both bourbons. They're like the same ratio of grain, same age, same proof.
Completely different.
But completely different. And they pair different, too. I think that Cave Hill, that's like the Cabernet. That's the thing that's going to go with like rich, meaty meals like pot roast. Whereas High Gold, I do like a chicken chili with High Gold.
Wow. Okay.
Probably why that Cave Hill tasted really good with the Taco Bell breakfast I had.
There you go, right? Nice enchilada bourbon. But yeah, I mean, and so, you know, I think that kind of ties in with our story, you know, where we started. Is, you know, Kaveh was a psychologist who was a Scotch drinker. He loved really nice Scotch. And then he met a girl from Louisville, Heather, that turned him into a bourbon drinker. And when they moved down here, he kind of took that background of being a Scotch and gin guy and applied it to bourbon. And at the same time, you know, he's moving to Louisville that has turned into a culinary destination, and Chicago was too. And so that's always going to be in the back of his mind. How does this pair? How does this go with food? How does this go with art? How does this go with music? Like, there's so many different avenues that you can take as a bourbon brand that I think not a lot of people did.
And downtown Louisville here is going to be, or has already started to be a bourbon destination.
Exactly.
I mean, we're steps from 2 or 3 different distilleries. So, is it something that they feel good about competing against because of the lineup? Is there any issues with literally being able to be a stone's throw from some of the other guys?
Definitely not. So I always say this: you compete on the shelves. Your products compete. The people don't compete. That's something that Cave has always kind of hammered into me. You know, one thing that Cave says that I love is there's not a lot of guys running around Kentucky named Cave making bourbon. And so when he kind of got into this field, he expected that there would be this sort of, who are you? You're an outsider. It was the exact opposite. Mm-hmm. He was welcomed with open arms because what's good for the distillery down the street is good for us. What's good for us is good for the distillery down the street too. Right? There's not enough bourbon out there. There's more people than there is bourbon, right? And so you're going to do well as long as you keep that idea of inclusion and camaraderie in the industry.
I wish I could ask Cave this. What makes a psychologist get into bourbon?
It's
because
good, right?
they're smart.
It's not your normal route.
Yeah, but that's just that is completely not your normal route. I mean, when you see most people get into bourbon, they're engineers or they're, some chemist. I mean, something that just blows my mind when you said that. My mind's still just firing off cylinders here.
So Scott, let me ask you, what makes a banker enjoy bourbon?
I just need to relax.
There you go.
And maybe that's the same thing. I mean, after listening to somebody's problems and shit all day long, I mean, you're like, man, I just need to pour myself.
Yeah.
It's a little self-therapy.
Yeah, but I remember a story. I can't remember who, maybe the guy from Jim Beam, that a local distillery that was like next door to him. I can't remember which distilleries it was. One of them burnt down. Mm-hmm. And instead of just saying, we don't have to compete with you anymore, he actually gave him barrels.
So you're definitely talking about the Heaven Hill fire. I think that was 1988. Heaven Hill, it was a huge catastrophe for them. I mean, the creek behind Heaven Hill was on fire. That's how much bourbon, and product went into out of the barrels. It was on fire. And the industry sort of rallied. And it wasn't just one other distillery. It was all the other major distilleries giving them barrels, giving them yeast, giving them product, storing their barrels from, things like that, so they could get on their feet. Without that, Heaven Hill wouldn't exist anymore.
Sure.
And so that's the sort of thing that Cave, I think, experienced when he started messing around with the idea of opening a bourbon distillery, is that he had people like we already talked about, earlier before the podcast started, Larry Ebersold. Larry Ebersold really helped Cave out. Jimmy Russell really helped Cave out. Julian Van Winkle helped Cave out. Like all these people, these major industry leaders really helped Cave out with the logistics of how do you open a bourbon distillery and giving them feedback on his product, right?
I just really hope that that's the future of bourbon. I hope that doesn't ever go away, because I know that was an old school type of mentality, and today people are less and less like that. So I hope that continues. So 20 or 200 years from now, we're talking about the same type of situation.
I think you say people are less and less like that. I don't agree with that. I'm not going to tell you. From my experience, people are more like that today. I mean, I think that there's always going to be some sort of thing happening. If it's an election year or you've got a pandemic going, there's always something that people are going to be divided about over. Bourbon will never be one of those things.
I agree with you, Adam, on that
Bourbon
situation.
Will never be one of those things.
So walking through, your all's, I guess, flight of different bourbons and things like that, your mash bills appear to have something that offers something to all bourbon lovers, whether it be finished products, high rye, 4 grain. I even tried the gin today, and I tell people all the time I hate gin. I didn't hate it. It was still not something I would pour on a daily basis, but it's still something that's out there, right? And
I thought it was really good.
It's a different, and that's fine. Like I said, I don't like gin. Like if I like gin, I would probably be like, that's great because I can get the rye, I get some of those finished notes of it. I cannot stand juniper. Like I feel like I'm just licking a Christmas tree, and I just don't like it. I mean,
I'm going to find a way for Adam to let me walk out of here with a bottle of gin today.
Hey, we might be able to make that happen.
There we go.
So if you don't mind, can you walk us through your product line? And we can start with Cave Hill because that's kind of the way we started when we drank these, and then walk right through that and just give us a little bit of insight of why it was done that way, and from a culinary aspect. Heck, could you tell us that? What would you pair that with, so that way our listeners can get a little bit better.
Or cigars.
Or cigars, yeah.
Taco Bell.
Taco Bell.
Right, so
the number 4.
So Cave Hill is it's a 70-10-10-10. So it's 70% corn, 10% malted wheat, 10% honey malted barley, and then regular malted barley. So give us a little bit of rundown on that.
So that is the original mash bill. That is the first bourbon. And this one really kind of, I like this order because it also tells the story of Rabbit Hole too. And Cave Hill, that's the one that Cave started with. He was a Scotch drinker. living in Chicago, like I said, met a girl from Louisville. She turned him into a bourbon drinker. And when they moved down here to Louisville, first of all, they opened a practice together, right? He was a psychologist. He started reading. And you were kind of asking what made a psychologist start making bourbon. Well, he's sort of an intellectual guy. He likes to read. He likes history. And he started reading about bourbon and bourbon history. And what he realized is that before Prohibition, there were something like 500 distilleries in Kentucky. After Prohibition, that number fell to 13. And in fact, today, there's like 60. I think not even close to pre-Prohibition levels. So he really started looking at some of those older mash bills that people don't use anymore. And the reason that people don't use this a whole lot anymore, like 4 grains and lots of malt, is because when all of those smaller distilleries sort of folded, the bigger distilleries bought up all their stocks, conglomerated them, right? And they sold it all off. But it doesn't make financial sense to sit there and make 100 different mash bills. That doesn't make sense. So, of course, everything went to, wheaters or rye bourbons. That wasn't good enough for Cave. He said, that's white noise. Why am I going to make a bourbon that is going to sit on the shelf and just be the same as everybody else? He could have very easily sourced a bunch of barrels that were high rye, put a label on there, sold it for $2 million and walked away. There's no legacy in that, and there's no fun in that either, right? So he wanted to make something that was different, but was also traditional. So he started looking at some of these older mash bills that were out there and noticed there was a lot of malt out there. Coming from his background as a Scotch drinker, that made sense to him. So he really looked for something that was, going to be different, but also balanced. And so when you start talking about adding the malted wheat in there, that's for texture. You start talking about the malted barley and the honey malted barley, that's the secondary flavoring grain. And so for me, like the Cave Hill, that shows that off. And it really celebrates those grains. It doesn't really hit you the way you expect it to. I think we were talking about this before, right? That you see that mash bill and you think, well, it's going to be very soft. It's not going to have a lot of spice. It's soft and it's supple because we don't chill filter, so it's always going to have that kind of deep texture to it. But the flavor on this is very spicy because of those barrels that we're using. Those Kelvin barrels, they're toasted and charred on every single one of these products. They increase the amount of barrel spice that you get. And then that honey malt helps finish it sweet. So it's all about balance with these products.
So one of the things that I see a lot of people do with the exact same mash bill is they may have 2 different brands, but the only real difference between the brands is maybe where they store them and how much they age them. So would that be something that could be the future? Say the Cave Hill, well, all of a sudden they come up with a Cave Hill 8-year that may be aged a couple more years that will definitely give it a different flavor, but it's the same mash bill. It's the same, just depending on how long you can keep it in the.
It's very possible. We don't ever slap an age statement or something on a bottle or say that it's gonna be this amount. Like we put the minimum age on our bottles, of course. But we also put everything else on there, the mash bills, all that, because, kind of what you were just talking about there, a distiller's going to take the same mash bill and they're going to age it different or put it in different warehouses or put different proofs on it and call it different names. That was something I think that really drove Cave crazy. When he first got into this industry and started thinking about this, you walk into a liquor store and you see 30 bottles of bourbon on the shelf. There's like 4 people making everything, but they all have different names. You can't tell where anything's from. The mash bills aren't on the label. He never wanted to do that. And so Cave Hill is Cave Hill, right? Now, it's not to say that maybe at some point we're going to release an older product that may be the same mash bill Cave Hill. I don't know. Maybe we will. Maybe Cave Hill, once it gets past 4 years, isn't as good as it is, at 4 years and under. So maybe it'll always be that. We just don't know until we do it. But I can tell you that if we ever do that, we're going to say it on the bottle. You're going to know exactly what it is. You're going to know what that mash bill is. You're going to know what the age is, because we don't want anybody to ever feel like they're drinking something they don't know where it came from and they don't know what's in the bottle.
That brings me back to the interview that we did with, what was the folks from Single Cast Nation?
Okay.
Where basically they sourced everything. But everything on their bottle, they tell you exactly where it's coming from. They're not going to hide the fact that they get it from MGP or
unless
whatever.
They're not allowed to.
Yeah, well,
Well, there's transparency there, right? Like if it says, Toloma, Tennessee, I mean, you know it's Dickel, right? I mean, So, I mean, I think that there's transparency there. They don't actually always put exactly what it was. Like, they just released that 24-year-old, pre-fire bottle. You know where it came from,
Man,
right?
that was expensive.
Yeah. So,
I can imagine.
so dive back into Cave Hill. Now, when I look at this, it's an untraditional 4-grain. Typically a 4-grain in that situation would be, corn, wheat, rye, malted barley. Do you know why, Cave, picked the 4 that he did? Was that a recipe from XYZ distillery back in 1846?
As far as I know, this is something that he came up with help. Talking to industry leaders as well, like, what do you think of this? What do you think of that? But this is really something that came from Cave. This is that legacy, that Zamanian legacy, right? And the big thing about this is kind of what I was just talking about, white noise. He could have made a 4-grain that was already rye and wheat, but that kind of exists out there already. Why do it? Other people are already doing that. We walked through the distillery earlier. We passed by that sensory lab that had a bunch of other bottles in there. That's the reason we have other people's bottles in there, because we want to know what's on the market. What's the point of spending all this time to talk about this, to talk about that, and then do the same thing that someone else is doing? There's no reason to do it.
Yeah. So, Scott, if I would have actually read the mash bill when I picked up a bottle of Cave Hill at, I think it was Total Wine a couple weeks ago, I probably wouldn't have picked it up. I picked it up just because I knew we were going to sit down. I wanted to try it and think about it before, and I never got around to it because there were enough open bottles at the house. And because it had wheat in it, I typically would have avoided it as a 4-grain, but it does not drink like it has wheat in it. That wheat is doing something different in this. And of everything, of the 2 bourbons, I won't say everything, of the 2 bourbons we've drank today, the Cave Hill was my favorite. And for our listeners that know that I'm a high corn, no wheat, and rye kind of guy, they would have said Josh would like the High Gold. And as we talk about that, you'll probably hear a little different.
So we'll dive into that now. We'll go into the High Gold. Tell us a little bit more about that. That one's the 70-25-5.
Exactly.
So let's drive in there and maybe even as we try this a second time, to go over maybe a couple of tasting notes that you get from it, and then what would you pair it with?
Yeah, so it's kind of what we were saying before. You think about this culinarily, the High Gold is a completely different animal. It's like having 2 red wines, completely different varietals, right? And High Gold with that 25% malted rye. First of all, it's German. That malted rye, that is a German grain that we're using. And that really talks about the name of this. This is named after Christian Heigold, who is a German stone cutter that lived in Louisville. Anybody listening to this podcast that lives in the area, you probably know about Heigold House. He really, he came to Louisville at a time when there was this party called the Know Nothings that were in power. They controlled the paper. They were very anti-immigrant. Even though he was up against that, he really embraced that idea of immigrant patriotism. Heigold House, he carved, the bust of James Buchanan on there, George Washington, Abraham Lincoln, very American scenes on there because he loved America. And I think that really resonated with Cave. Cave, whose family is an immigrant family as well, he is doing arguably one of the most American things you can possibly do, other than like eating apple pie and playing jazz. He's making bourbon. It's a very American thing to do. And so he wanted to name a bottle after Christian. Because we're using that malted rye, it's different than any other high rye out there. You think high rye bourbon, you think immediately spice, black pepper, dill, those sort of rye notes. This really doesn't have that. This drinks, the nose on it, super soft, very, very sweet, a little bit of orange peel, whereas Cave Hill's like the green apple and the baking spices and vanilla. This is like caramel, green, orange peel, maybe a little more citrus in there. The finish on this is different than Cave Hill, though. Whereas Cave Hill starts spicy and ends sweet, High Gold really, for me, starts sweet and ends spicy. And the spice, instead of being like kind of general baking spices that you get in Cave Hill, High Gold is definitely cinnamon to me. It has a great cinnamon finish on there.
Yeah, I get where you're coming from on those tasting notes for sure. The cinnamon is the only thing that I did miss. Like, I did not grab that, but I did get a little bit of spice at the back end, but it didn't resonate as cinnamon as far as that goes.
So both of the bourbons, the whiskeys we've had today are 95 proof. What's the background to why they were proofed down to 95?
Well, once again, white noise. There's a bunch of 90 proof bottles out there, and there's a bunch of 100 proof bottles out there. Cave wanted to create something that is very easy to drink neat. So a lot of times you get a 90 proof bourbon. That's great to drink neat because it's just 90 proof. But it's hard to make a cocktail with that because cocktails do better with 100 proof bottles, right? Because they kind of stand up to all those cocktail ingredients. So he felt like doing something that's 95 proof sort of splits that difference. You can enjoy any of these neat, but you can also make a really great cocktail with this. And, we were kind of talking about pairing. Usually, let's talk about old fashions, right? Usually when you make an old fashioned, use rye whiskey because rye whiskey is a little spicier. It stands up with those sweeter ingredients in that cocktail. You don't use, and we'll get to it in a minute, but we don't use Boxer Grail when we make old fashions up here. We're not going to use High Gold either because they're not spicy enough. We use Cave Hill, which has no rye in it, to make an old fashioned. Now, Manhattan, High Gold, definitely, or a Sazerac. A Sazerac is really great with High Gold because High Gold has like those citrusy sort of elements. Think about a Sazerac, always has those citrusy elements too. They kind of pair really well.
So last night, and we're getting ready to get into Boxer Grail here in just a minute, I dropped one of the Luxardo cherries and a little bit of that sugary cherry sauce in there. It was phenomenal.
Yeah, those Luxardos are nice. Those are nice.
Man, I told my wife I was going to order one of the big giant cans off Amazon, but I just don't know how I'm going to store them long term.
Right.
Like a big fat couple of ball mason jars or something to fill that bad boy up. So
got to find out if they have a shelf life. I just get the 2-jar pack from Amazon.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit more about the Boxer Grill. Now, anybody that knows me knows that I love the old MGP history, the 95.5 Larry Abersold, that type of thing. And whenever I saw this and I saw the mash bill, I was like, dude, this is going to be thunder, right? But it's a totally different taste than the typical 95.5. I'm almost curious if the yeast strain is that much different, but it's totally different notes. Like I almost got almost like a nutty flavor on this rye, which typically is uncommon for a rye. So give us a little bit more detail on the Boxer Grill and let people know what they're looking for.
Well, 95.5, that's the rye mash bill to use, right? That's the most celebrated rye mash bill out there because you're highlighting the rye. Now, the rye grain itself is Canadian rye. This isn't the same rye that we're using in High Gold, right? High Gold's using a German rye. We wanted to use Canadian rye with this because that's a little bit more in line with the 95.5 rye. On top of that, now the yeast, I will tell you, our yeast, we don't really focus on our yeast because we're not using a yeast that imparts a ton of crazy flavors because we really focus on the grains and the barrels. I think once you start adding yeast in there that has a whole lot of crazy flavors, it's like, cooking a meal you're using way too many ingredients for. You don't need to get that crazy with it. You start adding so much, it takes away from the final product. So the yeast, I don't think, is really going to be what's delivering nutty notes on this. I think there's some floral notes. This is a very floral rye, and the yeast is definitely doing that. But I think it's the barrels that really set us apart from your normal, LDI or MGP 95.5. MGP is not using toasted and charred barrels, as far as I know. Those toasted and charred barrels, I think they really tamed down this rye a little bit. This rye does not have the huge amount of black pepper and mint and dill on it that a normal 95.5 rye would because of those toasted charred barrels. Those barrels kind of lend a little bit more sweetness to this, which is why the nose on Boxer Grail is just like Werther's Original to me. I do get mint on this and a little bit of maybe a little bit orange peel, but the big note for me in Boxer Grail, which I love, and when we get to the end of this tasting, we'll do the full strength version of it. We'll get to the founders, but the black tea, like that sort of tea element on Boxer Grail is huge for me, and I think that is the really big identifier of the 95.5.
Yeah, that's what I was, whenever I sat back and I sipped it, like I was like, you do get like some of those tea notes, and I was almost even like almost like an Earl Grey, almost like an English tea.
Absolutely.
I get 100% where you're coming from, but it is totally different than any of the other 95.5 ryes that I've drank, and it might be because most of the stuff that I get is at barrel strength, and we're gonna find out here in a few minutes. It looks like so. Like I said, not a huge gin drinker, that type of thing. You want to give us a little bit more detail on the bespoke gin here, and what makes it unique outside of the fact that it's being finished in a rye barrel.
Well, there's a lot of uniqueness here, right? So first of all, a lot of people, when they start a bourbon distillery, they don't start making bourbon right away. They make gin and vodka because they can age their bourbon and they're still able to sell gin and vodka right away. Keeps their capital up. Cave didn't start a gin distillery. Cave started a bourbon distillery, and so he said I was going to make bourbon first, and I always loved that. But I did ask Cave when we released our barrel finished gin, which is bespoke gin now. It used to just be called barrel finished gin. I asked him. I said, "Why do we do gin?" And he goes, "Because I like gin." I was like, "That's a really great answer. I like that answer a lot, Cave." And I tell you, I'm kind of the same as you. I've never been a gin drinker, but this is a gin for non-gin drinkers. This one, the finishing in the Boxer Grail barrel for like 6 to 8 months, somewhere around there, really sweetens it up. The juniper is still there, but it's not as strong as it normally would be. And I think when you said Earl Grey tea a few minutes ago, I get Earl Grey tea and limoncello on this gin like crazy. Like crazy.
The lemon for sure.
It's not one of those ones that when you think of gin, you think you're going to mix it with something. You can drink this neat.
Yeah.
You can drink it neat. But I'll be honest with you, though. I mean, the cocktails that I actually use, gin for, I mean, and I'm a traditionalist. I mean, the only gin I keep in my house is Beefeater. I mean, it's the only one I've ever had, that I use for mixing cocktails. This would be something I would bring in for that.
Is that the traditional thing, Beefeater? Because
I mean,
it's
it's old grandpa.
he
It's
likes
grandpa
to eat
gin,
beef.
man. It's a grandpa gin.
I'm not experienced enough in gin to know if that's
You're experienced enough in eating beef, though, aren't you?
Yes,
Everybody loves a good steak.
I hear you. I hear you. So
hamburger.
the other distillery that I think we've been at where we sampled gin was Starlight. Was Huber Starlight?
Yep.
And they got us some right out of the I don't know what piece of
I
equipment.
mean, it was literally right out of the still. I
right
mean,
out
it
of the
was
still.
chilling.
Put it in a Glencairn, handed it to us, and that's when I nosed this bespoke gin. I mean, boom. It's juniper all over it. But now that I've come back to this here, a half hour later, I get that lemon, that citrus smell to it.
Yeah.
And I really want to drink some of this. It's getting me in the mood for the holidays. Not that, here we are in the middle of November and I've already had inflatable Santas and other things up outside my house just because COVID year, I don't know. We've got like 10 inflatables up outside of the house to annoy the neighbors right now. But this will help me really get in the holiday season.
No, I don't disagree. Like I said, it's one of the few gins that I've drank, outside of, Beefeater that I was just like,
This was actually, so I think it was Forbes magazine. They named this the best gin to drink neat in America in like 2018, which, let's face it, that's a really strange award. But are they wrong?
No.
That's really easy to. I mean, that's a cocktail in a bottle almost. Now, I will tell you, my wife does something really great with it. She takes club soda and mixes it. So it's just this with club soda with an orange slice. That's crazy. We call it a rabbit Ricky because it's like a gin Ricky, but rabbit. That's super good.
So I would like to smoke it and then throw it in almost like a LIT and eliminate the vodka to bring out some more of those caramely and then a little bit more of that citrus
Last
note.
time I drank an LIT, I was in college, and that's a no-go.
I still like a good LIT every now and then.
That's a no-go.
All right, let's talk a little bit. Let's get back to bourbon or bourbon finishes.
Oh, man, I love what you're about to talk about, and the nose on it just knocked me out.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit more about the Derringer, and then I guess I might have misheard you. Could you tell us a little bit more about where you're getting your sherry cask from, and then the aging process through that?
Absolutely. So Derringer is a wheated bourbon. So this is 68% corn, 18% wheat, 14% malted barley.
Which is also unconventional.
Very unconventional. Absolutely.
I'm going to have to talk to Cave one day. I'm like, Cave, dude, what are you doing? You're doing a bunch of unconventional
really
shit in the
crazy
bourbon
mash bills,
industry.
right? I mean, that's the thing is
Dude,
why
I
do
love
the same
it.
thing, right?
I love the fact that
Why do
he's
the same
outside the
thing?
box, right?
Yeah, you got to keep doing things different because people get bored. People get bored very easy.
Look here in the room we're in. Everything is very unconventional. We'll have to post some pictures. The artwork is unique.
Yes.
Has its own sense of place, we'll call it.
Yep.
Well, we're going to call that legacy, right? I
Yep.
mean, you can't make legacy if you're doing the same thing that everyone else is doing.
And
right?
I love the fact that Cave, and I don't know if it was the lady friend in his life that kind of distinguished this, but I mean, I love the fact that he's bringing bourbon history and the history of women in bourbon and how that
Absolutely.
kind of came in, and even people of color that are women. I mean, I love the fact that he's able to touch that history and bring it into what he's doing today.
I think it's important.
Absolutely.
I think it's very important.
It's huge.
And really, the Derringer, this is the homage to Heather. So this bottle, first of all, when you look at the spelling, it's Dare Ringer. I mean, we call it Derringer, but it's spelled Dare Ringer. The reason is because, first of all, Heather dared Cave to open a bourbon distillery. In fact, she said your bourbon obsession is going to lead this family down a rabbit hole, and that's where the name came from. And she's been his ringer. She has been his guiding star. She's the Kentucky influence. And so, sure, Cave and the family, I mean, that is who's running the distillery, but if it wasn't for Heather, we wouldn't be here. And so he wanted to pay homage to that journey. So like I said earlier, he was a Scotch drinker, right? She turned him into a bourbon drinker. He really loved sherry finished scotches, especially Pedro Jimenez sherry finish, so PX sherry finished scotches. He said, why can't you do that to American whiskey? So we found a wheated bourbon, we put it in sherry casks, you get Derringer. The sherry casks themselves, those are coming from Casnolia in Montilla, Spain. We like to call it 3 families, 2 continents. So you got the sherry casks, then you got the bourbon that's being made by the Zemanian family and then finished in Kelvin barrels. It's all 3 family owned companies right there, 2 different continents. This sits after it ages. So the bourbon itself, I think, is aged in like 5 to 7 years, somewhere around there. It is finished in the sherry casks for 6 months, sometimes as little as 3, sometimes as much as 9. We taste everything. Like I said earlier, it's a terrible job, but we taste everything, and we do everything really small batch because we want to make sure that we're being consistent and that we're not just throwing things into a sherry cask, being like, oh, it's been 6 months, put it in the bottle. It may be over-sherried, maybe under-sherried. It's all about balance. And so I like what you were saying, the nose on this. This is my desert island smelling whiskey. I could smell this bourbon for the rest of my life and be a happy guy. And the nose is unbelievable on this.
It's a Werther's Original butterscotch punch in the nose, and it is just darn good.
Yeah,
it is.
Yeah,
it overrides that sherry smell,
Yeah.
because sometimes when you get a smell of sherry, that sherry finish or that sherry, but this doesn't. I mean, it is. It's straight up Werther's Original. I mean, I totally agree.
To get back to what you were talking about, where she dared him to start a distillery. One of the things that I don't think we've ever really talked about, but I think it's a true statement, that once COVID hit, our podcast really took a nosedive because people typically listen to in the car. That's where they listen to podcasts. And I don't know that without the interview with Marianne Eaves, who is one of the biggest names, female in bourbon today, that interview shot us back up to where we were.
Marianne's awesome. Marianne and we grew up in the same place, so I think we went to the same high school. She's amazing. Mm-hmm. She's amazing. I love what she's doing right now.
She's got a phenomenal palate.
Yeah.
But we argue about this all the time. I think women just have better tasters than men anyway. I mean, everybody that I run into, I mean, Jackie's Icahn, some of the stuff she's picking out of, Ode Forester right now is just amazing. And then Marianne, I mean, there's other legacies that are out there, but I just feel like they just bring out, I'm like, man, where do you get that? And then I drink it, and then I drink it again, and I'm like, I do kind of get that, but I don't taste it up front like some people do.
But it's like a hobbyist. Don't you get like really pissed sometimes when like you meet somebody that has just an insane palate and you're like, I just will never get there.
Yeah.
Like we don't have a master distiller at Rabbit Hole. That's not how we operate. But we've got a head of operations named Cameron Talley, who was Brown Foreman and with Wild Turkey for a long time. And there was one time that we were nosing something. It was another product. I can't remember what it was, but it was like an unaged product. And we were like, there's a really weird note. It was like 3 or 4 of us sitting there, and we're nosing it, and we're like, there's something weird. It's very earthy, I think, or we couldn't nail it. And Cameron just walked in the room and picked it up, and he goes, oh, it's like Campbell's tomato soup. Not tomato soup, specifically Campbell's tomato soup. And we were all like, well, God, you're exactly right. Like, it's insane. And I remember thinking, like, I will never, like, I've got a pretty good palate. I'll never get to that level. Some people, they just have it.
Yeah.
They just have it.
And that's the thing. I mean, and like I've always said, I always just feel like women I think they got better sniffers than we do. Like maybe their sense of smell. Like I'm cooking something, and my wife's like, "What did you just blah 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 blah?" I'm like, "What the hell? How did you know I just poured cumin out of the cabinet?"
No. You're sitting on the couch and you let one rip, and she's like, "Did you just pass gas?" No, that was not me.
That was the dog. Blame it on the dog.
My farts don't stink.
But out of everything that we've tried so far, by far the Derringer for me is the one that I would go to the store and buy and have no problems keeping on my shelf consistently.
Yeah, I'm 100% agreeing. So that's the reason I'm really excited about this next one we're about to try, and we're going to let Adam, talk a little bit more about this Boxer Grail Founders Collection.
Before you do that, so the Derringer small batch, if somebody maybe had one 2 years ago and maybe didn't like it, it was different, come back to it, try it differently. I mean, that's kind of where I was, is that was the first rabbit hole I tried, and it wasn't my jam. But now that I've come back to it and I've smelled it, I've nosed it, and I've tried it differently, it's pretty good.
Kind of makes you wonder, did it change? Did you change?
I probably changed.
We've changed him drastically over the last year. I'm not going to lie.
You never know, though. I mean, I'm serious. So, I mean, really, this hasn't changed too much. I think maybe the age on has changed a little bit. But I will tell you, like, to be completely transparent with you, I know there was a time a couple years ago when we put out some bottles in the gift shop that were very dark. And I remember we put them up, and I was looking at them. I was like, these are really dark. And Cameron Talley came in. We popped one open. He goes, ooh, this is way oversherried. It's way oversherried. We pulled all those bottles, and we replaced them. And so you never know. Maybe, I don't think we had distributed any of them, but maybe one made it out, and you picked it up, and it was too much sherry. And that's the thing about doing small batches, is that every bottle you're going to get is a little bit different.
Scott's right. They've changed me. I was texting with a group, Scott and Matt, last night, I think. There may have been others on, but I was drinking something in the low 90s, and I texted them. I said, guys, this just tastes like it's lacking flavor. I said, I'm going to kick your all's asses if I have to drink everything that's 110 proof or higher now. Because a year ago, I was very much that 80 to 95, 80 to 96, the occasional 100 proofer. And now they've got me drinking, Old Forester barrel strength, 130, 131 proof whiskey.
Hazmat.
No. They've slipped a
we
few.
Slipped a few hazmats in on him. It just did not go over well. I'm trying to get him up there.
Hazmat is not for me.
I mean, one of my favorite hazmat bottles of all time is the 15-year Heaven Hill from a few years ago. That green label. Oh my God, that is a fantastic bottle. But I don't know.
I think my first high proof that I actually drank and enjoyed was about a year ago, coming up with the Talking Turkey episode. Scott came over to the house, and I think that's the day we opened up the George T. Stagg 2018 that I had at the house. So
yeah, and that was only like 130, so it wasn't even that crazy.
Is that all?
It was only 130, but
Only
a
130.
year ago when the highest proof I was drinking was Russell's Reserve, the 110 proof. It was a big jump.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I've noticed is you got 4 bottles here of bourbon before, of course, the Founders Collection. One of the standards that I know a lot of folks have in a lot of different distilleries is to be bottle and bond. That's their goal standard. That's not present here at all. Is that just something that he wants to do something a little different? He doesn't feel like that's the standard that he needs to focus on?
So bottled and bond is interesting, right? So there's a lot of history there. To be bottled and bond, it's got to be 100 proof. It's got to be done in a bonded space. It's got to come from one growing season, all the grain. Pretty much all bourbon hits that mark nowadays, except for the 100 proof, right? Mm-hmm. Because we're in a bonded space right now. Like right now at this moment, we're in a bonded space. All warehouses are bonded spaces, right? And so you don't really have to hit that. I think that's become more of a thing that people want to put on the label because it's become desirable. Now, that's not to say that maybe we're not going to do a bottled and bond at some point. Maybe we will. There's some great examples of bottled and bond out there. But I don't think it's something that we're really worrying about right now, because 95 proof for our main 3 here for Cave Hill and High Gold and Boxer Grail, it's kind of perfect. Really, it's kind of perfect for those. And so we'll see. I mean, like I said, we're open to everything. We're experimenting with a million things. I mean, we've got probably another 4 or 5 mash bills that we're messing with right now that may come out, may not. Maybe they're going to be terrible. Maybe they're going to be amazing. But I think it's just the AC kicking on. You all got some really powerful mics. But you never know. Maybe there will be a rabbit hole bottled and bond. I don't know. But just
let's be honest. Right now, the real hotness among the bourbon snobs is barrel proof, cask strength, something that's going to knock you on your rear end.
I thought you were going to say mellow corn, but
hell no.
Single barrel too. I mean, single barrel programs. Let's dive a little bit more into that. You said next year you're going to open that up.
We are.
But you don't
Come
think
on,
they'll
Scott,
be.
you're getting off track here, and I was really wanting to drink the Founders. So
All right,
let's
never
get back
mind.
to that
Let's get back
in just
to the
a minute.
Founders real quick, and then we'll talk about single barrel and the single barrel program. So Boxer Grill, Founders Collection. It looks like this one's coming in around 115.6.
So it's 114.6.
Oh, my
is
math's
this one.
bad. Yeah, 114.6. So
This is Rabbit Hole's very first limited bottle. These were some of the first barrels that we laid down, and these were the best of those barrels. So this only came from 7 total barrels. The total bottle count on this is 1,315. This is 95.5, just like Boxer Grail. It is the cast strength version, and it is phenomenal. In one word, it's
I
phenomenal.
mean, let's be honest. So, during COVID this year, everybody went to email releases, and I got this email from Rabbit Hole that said, "Hey, you're one of the first 100 to get a bottle." And it's like, damn straight, I won something. Screw that Pappy raffle crap.
This one, I will tell you, this has been on a few people's lists for Whiskey of the Year, and they're not wrong in that this is... I'm a rye guy. We were talking about this earlier in the elevator. I'm a rye guy, and this is one of the best ryes I've ever personally had. This one really is all about the family, right? So this is the Zemanian family selecting these barrels, blending these barrels together, and coming up with something really, really amazing. We kind of talked about some of the notes on Boxer Grail. This is all that, like, on steroids, right? This is black tea and leather and cherries and butterscotch and caramel, just for days. The finish on this is crazy, but I will tell you, my favorite thing about this is the texture. It is creamy, which you don't hear a lot of times when you're talking about rye. It is oily and creamy.
yeah, it's got a ton of oil to it. I mean, it really hangs to the glass. I mean, I'm rolling it now right now. Also, the nose is just really. It's spicy, but like a subtle, like soft spice. Like it's not even like your typical high rise in that situation. So
I think that really benefits from the low barrel entry. That 110, we're putting this in the barrel at 110.
Right.
You get less bourbon when you do that. You get less whiskey, so you kind of don't make as much money, I guess. But you don't have to put as much water in it when you bring it down to bottle strength. With this one, it's coming out of the barrel only a couple points higher what we put it in, right? We put it in at 110, comes out at 114. I mean, some of the barrels varied there, but the total batching of the 7 barrels together comes out to 114.6, and you can tell that in this bottle. It is just soft and creamy. The finish is unbelievable.
it shocked the palate from going from that 95 to that, though.
Yeah,
so
right.
let me go back in there.
93,
93,
coming
yeah.
from a
'cause
93,
I
right
did
at the Derringer.
drink the Derringer
So
last
when was this released?
About
6
3
weeks
weeks ago.
Was it that
yeah.
long?
Okay.
So we did that early release at the distillery we had 99 bottles total that we did a pre-release at the distillery, and that started
Winner, chicken dinner.
it started like the last week of September, and then we released this nationally mid-October or so. So it's already, in fact, I think I saw it on Caskers the other day, and I told you this, I don't think people believe me. I am not allowed to have a bottle. I'm not allowed to even buy a bottle of this. No one at the distillery is allowed to buy a bottle. They gave me a little 50 ml that I nursed forever, and then I finally convinced them to give me a bottle. So when I have podcasts or YouTube channels that I'm taking care of, I have a bottle that I can pour for them. I like guard this bottle with my life. I saw it on Caskers the other day, like the day they released it on Caskers, and like I knew how much Caskers had, and it was not a whole lot. I almost bought a bottle. If comics listen to this, you might get really mad, but I almost bought a bottle on Caskers, and I was like, oh, I can't do it.
Man, that's really unique.
So, Scott, looking at the Glencairn that we're drinking out of, and this thing just hanging on the wall, would you use your favorite word here, that it's viscousy?
It is very, very viscous for sure. It does have some viscosity to it.
Actually, it is really good. I haven't opened mine. I told you that. I haven't opened it, but I'd really... I know we tried the Boxer Grail, but our palates have probably been tongue-punched today with everything else we've got. So when I get home, I want to try, not today probably, the Boxer Grail, just the 95 proof versus this, to see how they stand side by side.
Yeah, I think you'll be really surprised at the difference in flavor, even though they're the same product. That proof change, kind of what you were asking before, like, is it a different product with a different proof? I mean, it really does become a different product. It really does.
And this is the reason why I tell people, barrel strength is where to go, because you can do what you want to do with it, right? Like if you want to put a little water in it, put a little water in it. If you want to put an ice cube in it, put an ice cube in it. But this by itself is just so clean, and I mean, it's just got such a great finish on it. It gives you that, I call it a Kentucky hug. It goes just a little below the throat and gives you a little right at the top of the chest, and it's tasty.
I just noticed that the pour on this was a little bit lighter than the rest of them.
Man, I'm really trying to hang on to this bottle,
He
guys.
is guarding this bottle, man. We're gonna have to
Really hanging on to it.
I'm gonna have to instant message Cave on LinkedIn and be like, hey, dude, you need to hook Adam up with another bottle here somehow, man.
Ah, man.
Well, so I interrupted Scott here because I was really interested in going ahead and getting to the Founders Collection. But he wanted to talk about, I think, what's next and single barrel programs. and
Yeah,
other
so
stuff.
let's talk a little bit more about, what's in the future as far as the single barrel program. I know you said next year it is pretty much booked up. You've got some
Maybe. Honestly, I don't even know. When it comes to the single barrel program, I know it's incredibly limited for this first year. I mean, there's very few barrels that we actually have. But what's really cool, I think Cave kind of let the cat out of the bag on one of his Instagram lives, the Cave Bourbon Bunkers that he does every Saturday, I think at 3:30. A couple weeks ago, he had Michael on. So Michael Matomedy was the second hire for Rabbit Hole. He's the chief marketing officer. And, they talked about this single barrel program that they're starting. And what's going to be really cool about this is that not only are you picking a single barrel of Rabbit Hole, but we're going to have an artist on hand that is going to design the label with you. So they'll hang out with you, with your group, kind of get an idea of who you are, and then they're going to design that label. And as you all were kind of talking about, there's a lot of art in this distillery. That's because art is, for us, tied to creativity, right? There's a really cool saying that we have around here. Production is repetitive, creation is personal. And I think that plays into it. The single barrel, you're basically creating your own product when you pick a single barrel from a distillery, right? You're picking out these barrels that are available, and you're creating your product. Why not also create your label? Which I know has been a thing. People have been kind of printing up their own labels. This is going to be the first time it's coming from the distillery.
I mean, so you
right?
guys are going to do it, and it's not even going to be like taterific like what we all do in the bourbon clubs.
No, it's going to be like a real artist is there with you, is going to design this label with you.
As Scott's over here stroking a bottle.
Well, it's one of those things. Like one of the things I love the most about Rabbit Hole is also one of the things that drives me a little bonkers is the fact that their bottles are consistent. Like they all have that square, kind of woman curve to it in the midpoint, and it's got the rabbit on it. Like
I have those same curves.
Wow. You're curved like a bourbon barrel, just like me. But like it's one of those things that like I love the way the bottle looks. It's pretty, it's sexy, that type of thing. But when I look at bourbon in general, like it doesn't match what you look at when you look at bourbon, right? So I'm just kind of curious of was that a Heather thought? Was that a Cave thought? Was that just some what we like to call as the black magic of the chief marketing officer or whatever? But I always just like to think what's going through somebody's mind through that process.
Well,
Bourbon.
Bourbon is going through their mind, definitely. But we've said some like buzzwords here, like transparency and innovation and creation. Those are all core values of Rabbit Hole. But one that we haven't said so far is collaboration, being a collective. I just kind of mentioned we don't have a master distiller. It's because we all kind of act like master distillers here. We all have input. So everything from bottle design to barrel selection, that really comes from a collective sense here. It's better to have everybody in on that final product than having one person running the show. Now, that being said, the family is really important here too, right? We're all a big family, but the Zamanian family inside of that, there's only a few people that are allowed to really tap into a barrel here, and that is the family. So the family really has a big say on what that bottle is going to look like. And the design of this bottle all came from Cave. He wanted it to be able to jump off the shelf, but he also wanted it to have this sort of sensual, beautiful look to it. And we were kind of talking about wine earlier, how we think about our bourbons from a culinary, like a varietal standpoint. Look at these, are almost like great wine bottles. These are really amazing curves to them, and they really highlight what's inside the bottle.
No, I agree 100%. And I love the fact that they took the time to order stuff that was unique to you guys. I mean, it's got the rabbit and kind of, I guess, engraved or etched, but it's not really. I guess it's just offset the way that they press it into the glass. But It's just very unique, and I for some reason I'm a bottle geek in some aspects.
So you want to see something that really is cool. I didn't actually notice this until I was watching a review of our Founders Collection, and somebody had gotten a bottle and did a review. I'm going to set these right next to each other. The sash keeps going from here to here.
Huh.
So let me be honest.
Cool.
When I got the email for the Founders Collection bottle and I found out I had air quote won, I was so excited that I just wanted to buy it anyway. But the bottle looks like it's a squashed, standard 750 bottle, and I'm like, oh my God, is that a 375?
We had a lot of people ask that, yeah.
And the email didn't say anything about it. And I'm like, man, did I just pay $200 for a squash for a 375 milliliter bottle? I did it anyway. But
No, it's a 750. It's just
it's fat.
It's reminiscent of I guess like a Knob Creek bottle, but it's got
Well,
much
I don't know
more-
if we could have put this heavy cork on one of these bottles. It
Yeah.
might have broken it in half. So
Yeah.
for our listeners that may not be familiar with their Founders bottle, it's got a cork like the Wild Turkey Masters keep, that heavy metal cork, and it's just heavy.
And the cork itself is fat. I mean,
Yep.
it's got some girth to it. I'm gonna pop that real quick. But yeah, it's definitely got some size and some weight to it.
It's a Masters keep style cork. So
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, let me ask a couple of questions here before we get off of here. What obviously we're here in the Louisville market, Southern Indiana area, and I know we have listeners that are from here to Texas to Spain to Australia to Germany, everywhere. Where can you find Rabbit Hole?
we are coast to coast. We actually launched. We want to talk about amazing timing. We launched our national distribution in March, and so it was had a little hiccup there at the beginning, but we're doing very well right now. We are available in all 50 states, so you can find us from coast to coast. We're not international yet, but we'll see what happens soon.
So when is the distillery going to be open for tours again?
Man, that's the $1 million question, right? It's really less up to us and more up to
The state.
yeah, and well, I mean, not the state. I mean, it's really up to something that isn't even human. It's COVID, right? It's really once we're able to kind of get in a place where we can safely offer tours. A big thing with hospitality here at Rabbit Hole is that we are very much about being best in class. When you take a tour at Rabbit Hole, it is. If for my opinion, we give the best tour on the trail because it's incredibly immersive. We answer all of your questions. You end up in this amazing bar. We have an incredible cocktail program that we set up here. The merch is amazing. The product is amazing. And we feel like we want to be able to offer that no matter what. And so with the mandates that we're going to follow, can we give that best-in-class experience right now? Not yet. Now we're sitting here trying to figure out how we're going to do that. So maybe we will open, before the end of the year. I really doubt it. But if we figure out a good way to still give an incredible tour here while following those guidelines, we'll do it. But until we're able to do that, we're just not going to open. We just don't want to put anybody at risk. And we also want to make sure that we're giving that best-in-class experience.
It's just a shame because
I hear ya.
it's a really cool place. We've been to several different ones, and I've been to tours everywhere, but this is different than any place that I've seen. So it would definitely be something that anybody that's downtown Louisville that goes to Angels Envy or OFO or Peerless or whatever, or Evan Williams, this is definitely a destination that they need to come to.
Absolutely, it's a beautiful facility. It's it's actually even a little hidden. I mean, from the rest of them. So I appreciate that fact, and there's not as much traffic at this end of New Lou as there is in those downtown areas. So definitely come out and give them a visit. Last question for me, and if anybody else wants to throw anything in before we finish up here, different finishes. Have you talked to Cave, and are there any plans for a port finish, or maybe finishing something with an actual toasted barrel after you've done it in a regular barrel? Is there honey finishes? I mean, you see all kinds of new things that are kind of out there, that type of thing.
Yeah.
What's the thought process there?
There is a lot that we have in the hopper right now that we're messing with. So this was only our first Founders Collection. We've got another that is going to be coming in the spring, and that is another finish as well. It won't be Boxer Grail. It's going to be a much older bourbon. Actually, it's coming from Cave's personal stocks, from the family stocks. Really old bourbon that's going to be finished in another type of barrel. It's I don't want to give too much information until we're putting it out there, but it's a really rare oak barrel that we're going to be using. But yeah, I mean, I've seen some port barrels run around here, some Armagnac barrels running around here. Doesn't mean that's something that we're going to release. Maybe we're just messing around right now. But we have a lot in the hopper that we'll see what's going to happen.
You just said Armagnac. All right. I'll need to come over for that tasting. So for people that want to find Rabbit Hole, they want to find the distillery, do they want to find the tour, that type of thing? Obviously, you're not open right now, but hopefully it will be before Christmas or maybe New Year's, that type of time frame. Tell them, how do we find you? How do we find
Absolutely.
Rabbit Hole, everything, all that stuff?
So we're big on social media, of course, at Rabbit Hole. Our website is www.rabbitholedistillery.com. Something really cool that we're offering are these virtual experiences. That's really where my role came from. This digital brand ambassador is really spearheading the virtual experiences here. Those have been very, very popular to the fact where I've actually had to get somebody else hired to take some of those off my plate because I don't have enough time in the day to do them all. One really cool one that we're offering, if you're here in Louisville, you can actually buy the package from the distillery and come pick it up curbside. It's where you buy 4 of the bourbons, so Cave Hill, High Gold, Boxer Grill, and Derringer, and it comes with a free virtual tasting that we'll schedule with you. We do it over Zoom. Really neat experience. And then if you're not from Louisville, we actually offer that package through caskers.com. It's a 3-bottle package, so it's Cave Hill, High Gold, and Derringer, and you get the virtual tasting with that as well. But hopefully, we're going to be opening up soon for tours and maybe at least getting this bar open, Overlook open. We'll see. We'll see what happens.
Address?
Address is, what is our address? 711 East Jefferson Street, I believe.
Okay, you're in Louisville, in the Nulu district.
Nulu.
Why you got to hit him with the hard questions, Scott?
I wasn't trying to hit him with hard.
I should know that. I should know that.
I want people to be able to come to Rabbit Hole and have the experience. I mean, that's what all this is all about, right? We want people to know what's out here, what's going on, and what they have available.
So let me give one parting comment here myself, is that I had tried Derringer a couple of years ago, and I wasn't a fan. But I came back today, and I'm going to tell you that that Werther's Original Nose Punch, as I'm going to call it today, it blew me away, and I quite enjoyed it. So I don't know if my palate changed or if it was a variation in a small batch. But I'm going to tell you, I was impressed today by the Derringer. And actually, I liked the Cave Hill. I thought I was going to be a High Gold fan because it was no wheat. I enjoyed the Cave Hill. And the rye is just good.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I 100% agree with what you came across at. So if you're looking for that, Adam explained it all. We're here in Louisville and Nulu, 711 East Jefferson Street. If you want to reach us at Bourbon Barrel Talk, you can. You can find us at bourbonbarreltalk@gmail.com for email, www.bourbonbarreltalk.com. The best way to get a hold of us is typically through Facebook or Instagram. We're pretty interactive there with our listeners and team. The biggest and most important thing is hit the subscribe button. Whenever you get in there, you can kind of see that, and that way you make sure you're getting all of our content as it gets delivered. Scott, Josh, Toby, and Adam, Rabbit Hole signing off.
Peace.